Black cop and trainee vanished on night shift. 17 years later, this is found inside an old outhouse. This happened in a place most people outside of Louisiana never heard of, a town called Grayford, tucked a little too far west of Baton Rouge to be convenient, and a little too small for anyone to care. Population maybe 4,000, 5 on a good summer with college kids home. The kind of place where people don't lock their doors unless the forecast says a hurricane might be brewing, and even then. It's more for the wind than the people. Back in 1988, Grayford had a small police department. Just 8 full-time officers, a sheriff who mostly handled paperwork and drank his coffee black, and a few green recruits coming and going with more ambition than staying power. The station was in a refurbished grocery store near the railroad tracks, still smelled like cold cuts on humid days. That summer, they had a new trainee, Isaiah Boone, just 23, fresh out of the academy in Baton Rouge. He had that awkward energy new recruits get, eager, twitchy, still trying to figure out whether to call people sir or just talk like everyone else. Boone was paired with Officer Terrence Mays, a calm, respected black officer in his mid-40s with 21 years of experience under his belt and a reputation for 2 things, never losing his temper and always knowing when something felt off. Terrence wasn't originally from Grayford. He'd moved from Jackson, Mississippi, after some kind of quiet falling out with the department there. He never spoke about it, and no one asked. Around here, that was considered respect. That summer, the department was doing overnight ride-alongs to train the rookies, and July 3rd was Isaiah's second week on the job. The plan was simple: patrol the outer roads, swing by the closed-down textile mill, check on the back roads by the wetlands. Routine stuff. Nothing ever happened during the graveyard shift unless some drunk college kid decided to get bold, or a dog got loose and started barking up at the moon. Boone's last words to his neighbor, a woman named Elma Dorsey, were spoken through the open window of his car, engine idling in the heat. "You hear anything on that scanner tonight, don't worry. Just training exercises." At 11:06 p.m., their cruiser, a standard issue 1986 Crown Vic with radio tag Car 4, signed out from the station. The desk sergeant, Mike Renner, logged their route as standard perimeter with a scheduled 1:30 a.m. check-in near the Levee Road. But they never made that check-in. At 1:42 a.m., Renner called them in over the radio. No response. Tried again. Silence. He told dispatch it was probably a dead battery or they pulled off near the marshes. Radios got wonky out there sometimes. He waited another 20 minutes, then sent another cruiser to look. Officers Dalemont and Ruiz traced the usual routes, even stopped at the bait shop where Terrence sometimes bought smokes. Nothing. They looped the area 3 times, then called the sheriff at home. By 4:15 a.m., the search became official. The car was found at 6:38 a.m. by a volunteer, retired firefighter named Roy Mickles. He'd been checking the wooded stretch off Parish Route 19 when he spotted the cruiser just past a bend, parked crooked between 2 trees near an old trailhead. Driver's side door open. No sign of struggle. No sign of either man. Keys were in the ignition. Radio was working, but nobody had touched it since 11:52 p.m. The last log was a dispatch ping from the station, received but never answered. Inside the car were both men's jackets. Terrence's flashlight was missing, but Boone's was in the passenger seat, dead battery. His notebook, half full of barely legible observations, was also left behind. Nothing seemed forced. Nothing was stolen. Even the coffee thermos was still warm. They pulled prints, ran dogs, set up grid searches. For days. Then weeks. And by the time the calendar hit mid-August, there wasn't much left to search. Locals started whispering, like they do. Some said they'd seen headlights deep off the trail where the car was found. But those woods had 100 stories tied to them already. Someone always swore it was haunted, ever since the old parish prison burned down in the 30s. Others said it had to be cartel-related. Or that Mays had finally snapped. Or that Boone wasn't cut out for the job and dragged them both into something stupid. But nothing ever added up. There were no tire tracks leaving the scene. No footprints. No blood. No calls from the radio. Just a car sitting in the dark, doors open, Louisiana air thick with swamp heat. And the sound of crickets echoing through the woods. The case never officially closed, but after 3 years, it was reclassified as a presumed double disappearance. It went cold. And it stayed cold. Until 2005. 17 years almost to the day after that night, a property developer named Reggie Landon was clearing out the eastern edge of the old Hollerbrook farm, an abandoned cluster of buildings nobody had touched since the 60s. The structures had mostly collapsed in on themselves, rotted by weather and neglect. But one thing still stood, an old wooden outhouse behind the ruins of the barn, tucked under a leaning pecan tree. The outhouse had been boarded shut with rusted nails and a piece of tin siding. The door didn't even creak when Landon finally popped it open with the claw end of a hammer. Inside, covered in dust and black mold, was a flat metal container, like a tackle box, but dented and sealed shut with 2 leather straps. Landon thought it was weird, but didn't think much of it. He carried it out to the truck, figuring maybe it was someone's old toolkit or something left behind by squatters. But when he opened it, he saw something that made him sit down right there in the dirt. Inside were 2 things. A folded department-issued flashlight, same model the Grayford PD used in 1988. And a rookie's badge. Tarnished, cracked at the edge, but unmistakably engraved. Number 417 Boone, I. By noon that same day, the Grayford Police Department, now a little larger, a little more modern, but still tucked beside the same rusted railroad track, was crawling with movement. Reggie Landon didn't wait long to make the call. He brought the metal box directly to the front desk and asked for whoever was in charge. The officer who took the report, Detective Amara Vell, wasn't old enough to remember the disappearance herself. She was 10 in 1988, but she did remember the tension in town, the way her father wouldn't let her go near the woods that summer. The porch light staying on past midnight. This box wasn't just a cold case relic. It was a needle dragged across a sealed memory. She asked Landon to show her the site, and within an hour, a full forensic team was walking the area behind the collapsed barn. The outhouse wasn't even on the old county survey maps. It had likely been built illegally sometime in the 40s. But there it stood, weathered, crooked, and now roped off with yellow tape. The metal box, still slightly damp from decades of humidity, was taken in for testing. It had no fingerprints, no markings, no visible signs of tampering. Except for one detail. Underneath the badge and the flashlight was a small folded slip of paper. Old, brown-edged, the ink faded to a kind of oily gray-green. It looked like it had been written with a fountain pen, the kind hardly anyone used anymore even back in the 80s. The note said only 4 words. He didn't walk out. News traveled fast. Grayford might have grown a bit, but it was still a town where everybody knew everybody, and this case had never quite left. Local news vans parked outside the station within hours. 2 former officers were interviewed on radio by evening, both visibly shaken. By day 3, a town forum was held inside the elementary school gym, where older residents, some who had been on the original search teams, started comparing details. People remembered different things. Some insisted that back in I-88, there was a fire near Hollerbrook Farm on the same night Mays and Boone vanished. Others swore there was a kid who'd claimed he'd seen someone in uniform walking into the pond behind the barn. But none of those leads were ever written down, and no one knew what had been passed along and what had been dismissed as noise. Detective Vell requested all original files from the 1988 disappearance be reopened. The county archive had most of the records, but boxes were missing, including a full folder of Officer Terrence May's personnel evaluations and 2 tapes from radio dispatch logs. Gone. The disappearance of Mays and Boone was one thing. But now, 17 years later, there were new questions. Like why a rookie's badge, confirmed through serial number to have been issued in May of 1988, was sitting inside an outhouse nobody even remembered existing. or why the official inventory of items recovered from the cruiser back in '88 didn't include any mention of Boone's flashlight being missing, when now it had been found. In mid-August 2005, two retired officers, both part of the original department in the '80s, agreed to speak with Detective Vell under condition of anonymity. The interviews were sealed, but leaks came fast. According to both men, there had been a quiet rumor inside the department at the time that Mays was investigating something off the books. Something he hadn't told the sheriff about. He'd requested copies of land parcel data near the old prison line. He'd gone into the county clerk's office to pull survey maps without a warrant. And the strangest part? He'd started pulling weather reports from the early 1930s, specifically looking into rainfall patterns and floodplain shifts near Parish Route 19. Nobody could say why. Nobody ever asked. But there was one detail that stuck out in both interviews. On the night of the disappearance, Officer Mays had briefly stopped by the home of a woman named Judith Calden, a 76-year-old shut-in who lived alone in a crumbling house off Old Mill Road. No call was logged. No report was filed. And the only reason it came up at all was because one of the officers had seen Mays' cruiser parked outside when passing through at 10:15 p.m., less than an hour before he and Boone vanished. Judith had died in 1997. Her house had since collapsed in a storm. But her son, Everett Calden, still lived in Grayford. Alone. On the edge of the same property. Detective Vell visited Everett on August 21st, accompanied by Officer Kaylee Rush. The property was overgrown, riddled with rusted fencing and broken windows. Everett, now in his 60s, long gray hair tied in a sun-bleached bandana, met them on the porch, chewing a toothpick and wearing a Vietnam-era army jacket. His voice was slow, almost too calm. He confirmed that yes, Officer Mays had visited his mother that night. Yes, he remembered the cruiser. No, he didn't know what they talked about. And no, he didn't think it had anything to do with Boone. Because, as he put it, that boy never got out of the car. I was watching from the tree line. He just sat there, staring dead ahead like something was going to step out of the woods and swallow him whole. When pressed further, Everett added something else. Something Vell noted but didn't include in her formal report. She kept it in a separate notebook. He said, "Mama used to say there was a house under the land. An old one. One they forgot to tear down when they moved the prisoners. Said you can still hear the chairs creak if you listen long enough at night." Vell left the property uneasy. Not scared. Just rattled in a way she couldn't explain. Like something old was being unspooled. Forensics came back on the badge and flashlight a week later. No fingerprints. No DNA. Not even on the paper. But the box had a trace compound inside the lid, a residue consistent with tantalith wood treatment. That type of chemical had only been used locally by two lumber mills, both of which ceased operation before 1970. Meaning the box and the place it had been hidden had likely been untouched since before either Mays or Boone were born. And yet, it contained items from 1988. 2 weeks after the discovery at Hollerbrook Farm, Detective Vell was approached by a man named Barry Denton, a retired county utilities inspector who now volunteered at the local library archive. Denton had heard whispers about the reopened investigation and wanted to share something he wasn't supposed to have. He produced a photocopy of a survey sketch dated June 1931, a crude, hand-drawn map of the area surrounding what would later become Parish Route 19 and the Hollerbrook property. At the bottom, written in smudged pencil, was a single annotation beside a square-shaped structure near the marsh line. Second cellar entry capped. Non-standard footing. Do not reopen. The original document, Denton explained, had been pulled from public record decades ago. The only reason he had a copy was because he'd been fascinated by underground structures and once made a hobby of tracing old storm drains in the area. Vell scanned the photocopy, then cross-referenced it with updated aerial imagery. That square-shaped structure, if it ever existed, would now sit directly beneath where the outhouse had been. So the next morning, She called in a private ground-penetrating radar team out of Lafayette. The department couldn't officially fund it, but she arranged it quietly, marking the request as a geological risk assessment related to possible sinkhole formation. The GPR scans came back that same afternoon. Below the soil, approximately 10 feet down, was a rectangular cavity, 6 by 8 feet. Walls on all sides. No sign of a connecting tunnel. But distinct void space geometry suggesting poured concrete reinforcement. Not natural. There was something buried beneath that outhouse. Excavation was difficult. The structure collapsed as soon as they tried to open one side, and for safety reasons, they had to proceed slowly, mostly by hand. What they uncovered by the third day stunned even the most skeptical observers. A reinforced concrete room. Walls still intact. No doors. No windows. No visible point of entry. No stairs. Just one hatch in the ceiling, square, cast iron, sealed from the inside with a rusted bolt long since frozen in place. Inside the chamber was nothing but empty shelving, and a single wooden chair bolted to the floor in the center. No chains. No restraints. No signs of habitation. Just the chair, facing the north wall. And on the wall, scratched into the concrete with what looked like a key or nail, was a message. He sat for hours. Never once turned around. There were no human remains. No signs of trauma. Just dust, mold, and silence. The GPR team quietly packed up and left. Vel didn't sleep that night. Meanwhile, something else was happening in town, less obvious, but harder to shake. 2 separate 911 calls came in that week from the same stretch of Parish Route 19, one from a teenager who claimed he'd seen someone in a police uniform walking down the middle of the road just after 3 a.m., and one from an older woman who reported 2 men standing by a tree, not moving, just staring at each other. Both reports were chalked up to misunderstanding, maybe someone playing a prank after the local news coverage. But Vel looked into them anyway. The teenage caller, Cade Wilkinson, 17, said the man he saw had something clipped to his belt, like a big square radio or maybe a pager. He only saw him for a second, then blinked, and he was gone. He wasn't high. He wasn't drunk. He was coming back from a shift at the gas station. The older woman, Loretta Crenshaw, 82, described the scene in more detail. One man was older, had a mustache and a heavy coat. The other was young, maybe 20. They just stood there, not talking. The older one had a flashlight, but it wasn't on. The younger one had his hands folded like he was waiting to be spoken to. Vel asked for the exact location. Loretta pointed to an old pecan tree. It stood 20 yards from where the cruiser had been found in 1988. Curious, Vel pulled the original radio logs from the dispatch system. Not the missing tapes, those were still gone, but the typed logs. She had a hunch. There it was. 11:52 p.m. Dispatch pinged car 4. 11:53 p.m. Ping received. 11:54 p.m. No response. 11:55 p.m. Dispatch sends final message. Confirm status. You are not moving. That last line stood out. Not just because of the words, but because it implied something else. Dispatch had seen the cruiser's position. Meaning someone, somewhere, had been tracking it. In 1988. But the department didn't have GPS systems then. And none of the cruisers were equipped with location pings. So how did dispatch know they had stopped? Vel called the technician who had handled early dispatch hardware upgrades in the late 80s, a now retired systems installer named Wendell Franks. When asked about the possibility of early tracking equipment, he said something that froze her in place. The sheriff at the time, Gable, was trying out some new gear from an out-of-state contractor. Something to do with signal triangulation and passive route logs. I only ever installed it in one car. The test unit. Car 4. Back in 1988, they had been tracked. But nobody followed up on those logs. Because the data went missing. Or never existed in the case files. or was pulled before it could be logged. Wendell gave her the name of the contractor, Lorland Systems, a private firm out of Texas that went bankrupt in 1991 after a series of undisclosed settlements. The sheriff's office had quietly erased every mention of the test program from their records. And the only reason Vel found out was because Wendell had kept one demo device in his garage. Still boxed. Still labeled. Vehicle Echo Model B Grayford PD Field Unit. Detective Vel took the box from Wendell carefully. It was heavier than it looked, a rectangular unit about the size of a lunchbox. Painted matte black, with one rusted antenna stub and a cracked acrylic readout panel. On the bottom was a faded sticker. Property of Lorland Systems. Prototype use only. July 1988. Wendell wasn't sure if it still worked. He hadn't powered it on since the 90s, but he remembered that it recorded passive telemetry on magnetic tape, not digital. Meaning, if the unit inside Car 4 had survived, and if the data had somehow been preserved, it might still contain a record of Boone and May's exact movements that night. Problem was, no one knew where the actual in-vehicle unit went. The Crown Vic itself had been dismantled after the investigation went cold. Officially, the vehicle had been scrapped in 1994 after being used as a training dummy for cadet search procedures. But the parts? They were auctioned. Sold off in bulk with dozens of other items from the Grayford Town garage. Vel traced the sales records. It took her 2 weeks of calls and a lot of dead ends, but she finally found it. One box of non-functional police electronics, including a Lorland chassis, had been sold to a junk collector in Lafayette for $40. The man's name was Clovis Merrill. And he still had it. In a shed behind his house. Clovis was in his late 70s, half-blind, and known around the neighborhood for hoarding broken tech. His yard was a mess of VHS players, rusted satellite dishes, and fiberglass satellite domes. But when Vel showed him the photo of the demo unit, he nodded and pointed behind the chicken coop. "Oh yeah. That weird thing? It's in the freezer. Keeps the bugs out." Inside an unplugged chest freezer, half full of packing peanuts and an old Nerf football, was the Lorland recorder. Dusty. Heavy. Intact. Vel took it back to Grayford, then drove 2 hours to Baton Rouge, where she found a retired electronics specialist willing to risk opening it. Inside were 2 spools of magnetic ribbon. And both were still intact. They ran the playback on custom equipment at LSU's engineering lab. It took 3 full days to decode the signal, reconstruct the telemetry, and align the timestamps manually with the 1988 dispatch log. What they uncovered changed everything. The system had tracked Car 4's movement from 11:06 p.m. to 11:51 p.m. Steady, uneventful, matching what little was known. But then something strange happened. At 11:52 p.m., the vehicle slowed near Old Mill Road, then turned onto a path that, according to modern maps, didn't exist. The coordinates showed the cruiser moving northeast through dense wooded territory, through land that hadn't had a drivable road since the 1930s. Then, at 11:53:48 p.m., the unit pinged a position. 0.0, 0.0. No location. No signal. Just blackness. The next data point came 17 years later, a static spike logged at exactly 2:16 p.m. on August 3, 2005. The moment the box was opened inside the outhouse. There was no data in between. The vehicle, or the device, had simply ceased to exist in a trackable location for nearly 2 decades. That weekend, Vel visited the site again, the ruins of the outhouse, now collapsed in on itself from the excavation. She stood at the edge of the hole where the buried room had been, wind moving the tall grass around her boots. There were no more leads. No more physical evidence. And yet, something felt unresolved. So she did something no one had done. She sat in the center of the chamber. On the bolted chair. Faced the wall. And waited. 10 minutes passed. Nothing. 20. The air felt heavier. 45. Her watch stopped ticking. And at the 53-minute mark, she heard something. Not outside. Not behind her. Inside the wall. A sound like wood splintering, followed by something softer. Breathing. She stood up, heart pounding, and turned around. There was nothing there. But on the chair, the one she had just stood from, something had been left behind. A folded slip of paper. Clean. New. No dust. It read. You weren't supposed to hear it. The note was analyzed. The ink was fresh. Paper from a modern batch. It hadn't been there when she entered. No one else had access to the site. Her team confirmed the feed from the motion sensor above the chamber, a temporary security cam, showed no one else approaching. Except, at exactly 11:53 p.m., the feed glitched. 6 frames lost. Then static. And when it resumed, Vel was already standing. The paper in her hand. The department pulled her from the case 2 days later. Said she was too close. That she needed rest. But she didn't rest. She dug. She found records no one wanted her to see. About other missing officers in the region. About structures buried during the prison relocation. About the Laurelin trial and how the company had been sued not for malfunction, but for classified possession. Possession of what? No one would say. But she did find one document. An internal memo from 1989. Stamped, confidential, Class D. Subject, Echo Unit Disruption, Grayford PD. It contained only one sentence. Unexplainable temporal anchor. Recommend full site burial. No retrieval. By October 2005, the site had been recovered by order of the county. The buried room was resealed, filled with cement. The land rezoned for agriculture. And the case was closed. Officially, nothing new had been discovered. Unofficially? Detective Vel quit the department 3 months later. She moved to Northern California, changed her number, and refused all interviews. But every year, on the night of July 3rd, she gets a phone call. From an unlisted number. No voice on the other end. Just static. Except for 1 year, in 2011, when the call came at 11:53 p.m., and the voice finally spoke. A man's voice. Calm. Clear. It said, I never turned around. And then the line went dead. After Vel disappeared from the public eye, the case once again slipped into rumor, not silence, just static. The kind of low, electrical murmur that never quite leaves a small town like Grayford. But then came October 2022. That month, a construction crew working to expand a fiber optic line through the northern edge of the old levee made a report to parish officials. While clearing a shallow ditch, one of their backhoes struck something metallic, a hollow thud under clay-packed earth. At first, they assumed it was old piping. But when the workers dug it up, they found something entirely different. A rusted steel locker. Unmarked. Locked. Weighing nearly 70 pounds. It had been buried beneath exactly 12 inches of soil, recent, by geological standards. Inside was a police radio. Standard issue, early 80s model. Badly corroded, but unmistakably stamped with serial number 4 MGPD. Indicating it had once belonged to Car 4. Alongside it was a cassette tape, micro format, the kind used only briefly between 1986-1991 for field interviews. The label had long since peeled off. The tape itself had no external markings. What was strange wasn't the presence of the radio. It was that the locker had been padlocked from the inside. The item was transferred, quietly, to the Grayford Historical Society due to a bureaucratic quirk, since the department no longer had an active case file and no chain of evidence protocols remained. The locker defaulted to recovered historical object status. For 2 months, it sat in a back room next to old church registers and railroad ledgers. Until a visiting intern named Cora Wiles, who'd grown up hearing her uncle talk about the Grayford vanishing, got curious. She had a friend in Baton Rouge who worked in magnetic tape restoration. 2 weeks later, they had the contents of the tape. The recording was grainy. low fidelity. But what it captured was clear. The first few minutes were silent, then static. Heavy, buzzing like it was near a transmission tower. And then came a voice. Male. Slight southern drawl. Calm. Deliberate. I don't know what day it is. I don't know how long I've been sittin'. Thought I could wait. Thought someone would come. But it's always the same. I get out of the chair, and I'm right back in it. Another pause. A breath. Then. Boone's gone. That ain't his fault. He didn't walk in here with me. I think maybe he's been outside this whole time. Watching. The tape cut for 6 seconds. Then resumed. Sometimes, I think I can hear him callin'. Or maybe it ain't him. I ain't turned around. You said not to turn around. Another pause. Then a faint tapping sound, like something brushing the mic. And the final words. Tell her she's not supposed to sit in the chair again. The second time, it don't let go. The tape ended there. When news of the tape reached the sheriff's office, a quiet panic stirred behind closed doors. They reached out to a few external experts, not from the FBI or state crime labs, but private contractors from Atlanta with government credentials no one could quite verify. They took the tape. They took the locker. They sealed the work site. And 2 weeks later, the fiber optic expansion was abandoned due to soil instability. But Cora had made a copy. And she kept asking questions. She found a name in an old memo buried deep in the public record, Dr. Joseph Kellner, a geotechnical analyst contracted in 1989 to study sinkage anomalies in Parish 9 near Grayford. She drove out to meet him. He was now 83 and living alone in a trailer park west of Houston. Alzheimer's had taken most of his short-term memory, but when she mentioned the town, his eyes changed. It's still making sound, ain't it? She asked what he meant. The place. Beneath the old line. We ran seismic on it. July of '89. Thought it was just a void at first. But then the readings came back. Pulses. Rhythmic. Like something pressing outward. He said he submitted the report to Lorland Systems. And they paid him to forget it. They said don't go back. Don't even say the word, Grayford, again. But I still hear it sometimes. When the air's real still and the dogs stop barking. I hear the pulse. 3 months later, Cora Wiles vanished. Her apartment was found undisturbed. Her car still in the lot. Wallet on the counter. Only her recorder was missing, and the notebook she kept with hand-drawn diagrams of the chair, the chamber, and the taped voice. Her last known online activity was a forum post, now deleted, where she wrote, "What if the chair isn't the prison? What if it's the only thing keeping the door closed?" It's now been 34 years since Officer Mays and Trainee Boone vanished. Every July, someone still leaves a note on the marker placed by the woods where the cruiser was found. Handwritten. Never signed. They all say some version of the same thing. We didn't forget. But we didn't look the right way. And every single year, on the night of July 3rd, the town's emergency scanners pick up a signal for exactly 1 minute. It's always the same frequency. Always the same timestamp, 11:53 p.m. And always the same voice. Still here. Still waiting. Don't come in. By early 2023, local authorities in Grayford had officially discouraged unauthorized investigations into the events of 1988. An internal memo from the sheriff's office even stated, "Any further pursuit of the Boone-Mays matter risks compromising community stability and departmental integrity." But that didn't stop everyone. One of the most persistent was Jacob Pell, a 41-year-old school teacher and amateur historian who had grown up 3 blocks from the old PD building. He had been 16 the year Mays and Boone vanished. He remembered the sound of helicopters that week. He remembered the night his dog growled at the empty yard. He remembered the way his father, once a cop himself, went silent when asked about Car 4. Pell wasn't a conspiracy nut. He didn't post online. He didn't care about temporal anchors or government psyops. He just wanted to know why his town had learned to look away. That spring, he began collecting blueprints, county land records, and fire inspection reports. One thing jumped out again and again: certain parts of Grayford never mapped correctly, especially near the old levee and the site of the buried chamber. 3 separate sewer diagrams, dated 1932, 1965, and 1981, showed different structures labeled WC utility access. But none of those matched what was physically there. One map showed a drainage cistern. Another showed sealed civil defense bunker. The most recent simply said, "Access discontinued. Do not disturb." So Pell walked the lines himself. He bought an old GPR scanner from an auction site and began scanning open soil near the overgrown parts of Hollerbrook Farm, staying just outside the fence line. In April, he got a return signal. A void. 14 feet deep. Not rectangular this time. Cylindrical. Lined with metal struts. And in the center? A spike. A literal steel spike embedded vertically in the earth. He spent the next 2 months trying to get anyone to listen. The sheriff's office ignored him. The parish board never returned his calls. But in June, he received an anonymous envelope. Inside was a photo. Faded, black and white, with curled edges. It showed the same patch of earth, decades earlier, with 3 men in overalls standing beside a crane and a spool of electrical cable. In the center of the photo was the spike, clearly visible. And scrawled on the back in blue ink. This held it down. Not anymore. No return address. No name. Pell posted the image anonymously to an obscure digital forum. Within 2 days, he was contacted by a woman claiming to be a former Lorland Systems contractor, a data technician once tasked with archiving thermal echo recordings from classified installations. She didn't give her full name. Just Marie. Marie told him that Grayford was Site 6, one of several locations across the South that had been identified as displacement points. She didn't elaborate, but she said the chair was never meant to hold people. It was a tuning fork, Jacob. Not a seat. A resonance lock. You sit long enough, it stops being a chair. He asked what it was locking. Her answer chilled him. Whatever sees you once, sees you always. The chair was the blink. Then the line went dead. He never heard from her again. That summer, strange events began escalating around Grayford. None made the news. A night shift utility worker fell into a 12-foot sinkhole that appeared suddenly beneath the edge of Route 19. A group of teenage hikers claimed they lost time while walking near the old pecan tree. Their phones all reset to 11:53 p.m. And an off-duty officer's dashcam captured 37 seconds of video showing a stationary cruiser, headlights on, with 2 figures inside, despite no other vehicles being dispatched that night. The cruiser's license plate was visible. May 417. But no such plate existed in the registry. Word reached Vel in California. She'd stayed hidden, stayed off the grid. But when she saw a photo of the cruiser frame pulled from the dashcam footage, she knew it. It wasn't just a car. It was the car. Car 4. She returned to Louisiana in secret. No official statements. No contact with police. She found Pell. He showed her everything: the spike site, the tapes, the maps. And the envelope with the photo. They decided on one last descent. On July 3, 2023, exactly 35 years after the night Boone and Mays vanished, they dug by hand beneath the metal spike. 6 feet down, they found concrete. 9 feet, they hit rust. And at 12 feet, a hatch. Round. Iron. Marked with a symbol neither of them recognized, a 6-pointed spiral inside a triangle. They opened it. The passage below was dry. Lined with metal ribs. Narrow. Cold. Vel descended first. Pell followed. They walked. The tunnel curved, impossibly so, looping in a way that made Pell dizzy. He kept checking his watch. The hands had stopped moving. At the end was a chamber. Round. Seamless. Stone walls, smoothed and etched with lines like veins. And in the center, not a chair this time, a mirror, 6 feet tall, framed in black metal, cracked at the top corner. No reflection showed in it. Only depth. Endless depth. Like looking down a well that didn't bottom out. And next to it, on the floor, a single object. A badge. Boone's. Still cracked. Still tarnished. Same as the one in the outhouse. But this one was different. This one was warm. Vel stood frozen before the mirror, but mirror felt like the wrong word. It didn't reflect. It absorbed. No light bounced back. No shape returned. Even her own outline was just a shadow at the rim. She reached out, slowly, her fingers stopping inches from the glass, and suddenly she said, "It's not cold." Pell didn't respond. He was staring at the badge, not just because it was Boone's, but because he'd seen this exact badge before. In a photo that hung in his high school hallway until 2007. A commemorative photo of Officer Isaiah Boone missing in the line of duty. In that photo, the badge wasn't cracked. But this one had the same serial number, same wear on the corner, same scratch below the numbers. That scratch had only appeared in the photo after 2005, after the box had been found in the outhouse. As if history had changed. Vel finally pulled away from the mirror and turned to him. "It's not Boone's mirror," she said. "It's his view." Pell didn't understand. She clarified. "This isn't where he is. It's what he's still looking through." They tried to leave. But the tunnel behind them was gone. Only smooth stone. No opening. No air draft. No incline. Pell started to panic. Vel just stood silently. Listening. "Do you hear it?" He did. Not a voice. Not footsteps. Just shifting. Like fabric being dragged over stone. Or breath moving across a long hallway. A low, rhythmic sound. Almost like a clock. But not ticking, pulsing. Then something else happened. Vel's flashlight flickered, once, twice, then died. In total blackness, Pell's voice cracked. "This is it. This is where they went." But Vel calmly answered. "No. This is where he stayed." Mays left. Pell didn't understand. He asked the only thing that mattered. "Where did he go?" She didn't answer. But her hand moved to the side wall, where her fingers found something carved into the stone. A spiral. The same 6-pointed shape as on the hatch. Except now, inside the spiral, was something new, a date. July 3, 2024. That was a year from now. They eventually escaped. At least, that's what they told people. 3 days later, Pell posted a single image to a private forum, a blurry shot of the spiral symbol, carved deep, freshly etched, with the date beneath it. He included one sentence. "We weren't supposed to bring it back." Then he deleted his account. Summer passed. The town of Grayford returned to normal, if anything in this story could be called that. But something else began surfacing across the state. A man in Shreveport turned himself in after claiming his brother had been living inside his walls since 1988. A woman in Slidell jumped into a lake at night and, when pulled out, insisted she'd seen her mother at the bottom, her mother, who disappeared as a child. A college student from Natchitoches woke up in the woods, barefoot, clutching a Grayford police patch with blood under her fingernails. In every case, when authorities tried to identify how the person had traveled, when they'd left home, or why they had the objects, nothing made sense. And in each case, the time of reported onset was logged as 11:53 p.m. Meanwhile, Vel returned to the place once more, alone. She told no one. Left no notes. But what she did leave, several weeks later, was a voicemail. It arrived on the department's old tip line, time-stamped July 3, 2024, the exact date etched into the chamber wall. The audio was degraded, grainy, but still recognizable as her voice. "If anyone finds this, I think he's still watching through the glass. Not to escape. Not to be rescued. I think he's waiting for the next one to sit. There's a pause. A long breath. Then. Tell Boone. I didn't turn around. Then static. The message looped exactly 7 times before cutting out. And at 11:53 p.m. that same night, an automatic door sensor on the back of the Grayford Police Department activated. The door opened. No one entered. But when officers checked the security feed, they saw car 4. Stationary. Headlights on. No driver. Just sitting behind the building. Engine cold. But the radio was transmitting. And from it came a voice. One word. Again. After the mirror, after the tunnel and the badge in the darkness, Pell and Vel stopped speaking publicly. But 2 things happened in the weeks that followed that neither of them could explain away. 1. Vel began losing time. Not in the metaphorical sense, she would literally wake up in places she hadn't been, with objects on her person she couldn't account for. One morning she awoke on a bus bench in Opelousas with her police badge in her shoe and Boone's cracked badge in her coat pocket. She had no memory of traveling there. She hadn't driven. She hadn't taken a bus. 2. Pell began hearing a sound in his apartment at 11:53 p.m. every night. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even mechanical. It was a voice. A whisper. Sometimes a laugh. Sometimes the sound of someone shifting in a chair. On August 9th, Vel received a small padded envelope by mail. No return address. No tracking number. Inside was a Polaroid. Faded. Slightly water damaged. But unmistakable. It showed 2 figures in a dim hallway, one in a police uniform. Seated in a metal chair. The other standing behind him, hand on his shoulder. Written at the bottom in handwriting she recognized as her own, though she didn't remember writing it. He didn't leave. He changed seats. That night, she contacted Pell for the first time in weeks. Jacob. I think we've been sitting the whole time. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice cracked. How do we know we're not still down there? Later that month, a private archivist going through the Lorland Systems bankruptcy files found something strange. A document misfiled in a property deed folder labeled Site 6 Residual Program Assets. Inside it were transcripts. Not official records, just typed copies of what appeared to be internal radio logs from July 3, 1988. 4 pages total. One page contained the following exchange, time-stamped 11:53:21 p.m. Car 4, unconfirmed. We're at the tree line now. Something's different. Boone says he doesn't want to get out. Can't see the trail. Dispatch, unconfirmed. Do not exit vehicle. Do not engage subject. Car 4. Too late. He's already outside. 13 seconds of static. Car 4. He turned around. End log. There is no record of that log in the official Grayford Dispatch archives. But the scariest detail wasn't in the words. It was the watermark on the page, a circular logo with 3 letters below it. BDP. Boone Displacement Protocol. Then, in late September, Vel called a contact from her early days in Baton Rouge, a sound engineer who had helped digitize some of the old recordings from the PD archives. She asked him to clean up the original tape from the Outhouse box, the one with the voice that said tell her she's not supposed to sit in the chair again. He did. And what they found when they slowed the tape was wrong. In the background, layered almost imperceptibly beneath the main voice, was another. Fainter. Crooked. Not words exactly, but repetition. Like someone reading from a list. Mays. Boone. Vel. Pell. Boone. Mays. Boone. Mays. Vel. Pell. Vel. Pell. Boone. Then static. Then silence. By October, Pell had moved out of Grayford. He left no forwarding address. But his landlord reported something strange. The room was empty. Immaculate. But in the center of the floor was a wooden chair. Not antique. Not modern. Just plain. And carved into the backrest, barely visible without touching it, were 3 words. I stayed seated. Meanwhile, Vel was last seen at the Grayford Historical Society, retrieving a sealed file that had been misdelivered from a state archive. Surveillance shows her leaving through the back door at 11:52 p.m. She never reached her car. At 11:54, the outer lot camera glitched. And when the footage resumed, the car was still there. Door wide open. Keys in the seat. And in the back, on the seat where a prisoner might have sat, was her notebook. Open to the last page. One line written in frantic ink. I didn't bring it with me. It followed. It's now been 36 years since officers Terrence Mays and Isaiah Boone disappeared from Grayford, Louisiana. Their case remains technically open, but no one investigates it anymore. No one talks about it in the station. A small framed photo of them still hangs in the back corridor, near the vending machine, where no one really looks. But something has changed. Something quiet. In the summer of 2024, the local parish approved the construction of a new water treatment plant on the eastern edge of the old Hollerbrook site. It was a formality, really. The land had been zoned for utilities since the early 2000s. No one objected. Not publicly. But several crew members resigned after day 1 of excavation. They claimed the soil was wrong. One worker, interviewed under anonymity, described the sensation of the ground humming beneath the tread of the equipment. Like you're standing on a speaker. But there's no sound. Another said he found his shadow stretched in the wrong direction, toward the sunlight instead of away. When asked to elaborate, he simply said, "It moved when I didn't." Then came the incident with the camera drone. The construction team had sent a drone with infrared and lidar capability into the tree line near the levee, hoping to map root systems. It flew for 13 minutes. Then dropped. Signal was lost. When they recovered the footage, it showed what looked like a clearing, but the vegetation around it appeared blurred, as if vibrating. In the final 10 seconds, the drone rotated and captured a figure at the far edge of the trees. Dressed in black. Wearing a badge. Not walking. Not speaking. Just watching. The footage was wiped before it could be archived. The plant was quietly shut down. The site, once again, fenced and left untouched. The project was blamed on cost irregularities. No one publicly linked it to the Boone-Mays disappearance. But the timing didn't go unnoticed. July 3, 2024. The exact date carved into the stone beneath the mirror. The date Vel vanished. A few weeks later, the Grayford Public Library received an unmarked package in its overnight drop bin. Inside were 3 things. A VHS tape labeled 1988 training log do not erase. A hand-drawn map of the Grayford Woods, with a red spiral circled in the northwest quadrant. A sealed envelope addressed simply, to whoever finally sits still long enough to hear it. The librarian didn't touch the contents. She called the sheriff's department. The box was collected. The envelope was never opened. It remained sealed, archived in a basement drawer labeled unresolved. Then came the sound reports. Across town, residents began reporting a low tone coming from their basements at night. Just past midnight. Always around the 53-minute mark of the hour. Dogs barked. Phones vibrated once, then stopped. Some claimed they saw light inside closets that were shut. Others said they saw faces in bathroom mirrors, not their own. And in the middle of this, someone created an anonymous page on a long-defunct local forum, a simple text post, dated July 3rd, with no name and no title. It read, "We're all sitting now. Some of us just haven't noticed. Grayford's new sheriff, a man named Paul Lerman, now keeps a locked cabinet in his office. No one is allowed access but him. Inside are 7 items. The original badge from the Outhouse. Boone's second badge from the Mirror site. A cassette copy of the 11:53 tape. A broken name tag labeled Mays. The unplayed VHS. A photo of Vel taken by a traffic cam at 8:53 p.m. on July 3, 2024, even though she was already missing. And a note that reads only, "If he turns around again, burn the chair." No one knows who wrote the note. But it wasn't in the drawer the day before. These days, the town tries to move on. But kids whisper about the woods again. People take the long road instead of Route 19. And every once in a while, a call comes in, faint static, long pause, one word. Sometimes it's still. Other times, listen. And sometimes, when the line is clearest, when the signal doesn't break, it's a phrase no one wants to hear. A voice saying, "Another seat's been taken." And if you drive through Grayford late at night, on the right kind of night, on the wrong kind of road, you might still see it. A parked cruiser. Engine off. Headlights dead. 2 men inside. One old. One young. Neither moving. Neither speaking. And if you slow down to look, you might hear something behind you shift. But whatever you do, don't turn around.